On April 7th, 1997, the Miami Fusion were announced as MLS's first ever expansion franchise, becoming the 11th MLS team and the second Floridan team only behind the Tampa Bay Mutiny. A man named Ken Horowitz would be their owner. The Orange Bowl was originally the target destination for the Fusion to play in. But the city of Miami wanted a long-term lease, and they also wanted a relocation clause preventing the team from relocating from the stadium during the course of the lease, I believe. But Ken Horowitz wanted some more flexibility in the lease. He didn't want that clause, and he also wanted a shorter lease. So he ended up not signing a lease with the city of Miami to play at the Orange Bowl. And instead, he made it so that the Miami Fusion would play north of Miami in the city of Fort Lauderdale, where he made an agreement with the city and the Broward County School Board to play at Lockhart Stadium. Lockhart Stadium was part of a high school sports complex built in the late 1950s that had also been used for the Fort Lauderdale Strikers of the North American Soccer League back in the day. This stadium was no stranger to soccer. The Fusion would renovate the stadium for $5 million, making some upgrades and expanding it to 20,000 capacity. Back in the heyday of the Fort Lauderdale Strikers, they were getting around 14,000 fans per game. This was like their best season, in a stadium that was about 17,000 capacity. As many of you may know, the whole complex that Lockhart Stadium was actually torn down to be replaced by the training complex and the temporary home ground for the MLS Miami team, which is Inter Miami. The Fusion squad started to come together ahead of their inaugural season. MLS legend and fan favorite Carlos Valderrama was traded from Florida rivals Tampa Bay Mutiny to be a star player for them. Diego Serna, a Colombian striker, also signed with the club and would become a major influence for the team's entire existence. Also, a young midfielder, probably a familiar name as well, in Pablo Mastroeni, was drafted in the second round of the 1998 MLS College Draft to the Fusion, and he would become an integral part of the team over the years. He would become one of the better players in MLS throughout his career. The Fusion played their inaugural season in 1998, expanding into the league alongside Chicago Fire. The attendance for the game was over 20,000, making it actually a sellout, and attendances were good right at the start, but they quickly took a dive to average about 10,000 fans per game come the end of the season, in large part due to poor performances. In fact, come the end of the season, the original coach had already been sacked and replaced. At the time in MLS, it was a lot easier to make the playoffs, so that manager who replaced the previous one ended up actually having a bit of a rebound with the team and ended up finishing 4th place, making it so that the Fusion would make it into the playoffs, as the top 4 teams out of each 6-team conference would make it to the playoffs. They would play early on to DC United, but they would unfortunately lose to them. So during the 1999 season, Carlos Valderrama had a feud with the manager. So what did the manager do? He benched him. And Carlos Valderrama, if you know anyone who knows a decent amount of MLS history, or you know a decent amount of MLS history, you would probably know that Carlos Valderrama was one of the most notable players in the early days of MLS. He was a very exciting player to watch, and as a result, he'd bring a lot of fans to the games. So, being the fact that he was benched, and I believe he was one of the top 5 highest paid players in the league at the time, MLS Commissioner Doug Logan wasn't very happy about this. So he decided to take action. And what did he do? Well, he decided to force a trade between the Miami Fusion and Carlos Valderrama's former team, the Tampa Bay Mutiny. And he said they got a pretty good deal on the trade. I believe they were asking for a bit more, and that's why they weren't getting any trade deal done, the Miami Fusion. People who watched MLS weren't very happy about this, because they didn't like that the MLS head office was getting involved in the dealings of teams in MLS. And there had been multiple controversies with MLS back in the day. This was really another big controversy with MLS that was in their early days, and it was one of the reasons why people were so angry with MLS Commissioner Doug Logan, and it was one of the factors that led to him getting ousted in the end. it wasn't all of the factors. There was many factors that led to that, but it was one of the factors. The thing about Commissioner Doug Logan is that still to this day he defends that decision because he was saying about, here was this high paid player, who was a star player, bringing fans to the games, and he needed to fix that problem. So he decided to, make that trade, and he said it was for a good deal, and he thought it was for the best of the league. But it really made the league kind of look like it lacked a bit of credibility when the MLS head office could just get involved in any trade that they thought was for the betterment of the league. So that was a big controversy. Interest and attendance would continue to gradually decrease in the team over the years until the end of the 2000 season, after the Fusion had lost once again to eventual champions DC United in the playoffs in 1999. But they also failed to make the playoffs in 2000, finishing 9th out of the 12 teams in the league. There's only one good moment where Miami Fusion made it all the way to the 2000 US Open Cup final, only to lose to their expansion, you could say, sisters, Chicago Fire 2-1 at Soldier Field. On the bright side, they had drafted Nick Rimando in the 2000 MLS Super Draft, and he would become an integral part of the team, especially in the 2001 season. So ahead of the 2001 season, it was reported that MLS was considering cutting back the number of teams by 2 from 12 teams to 10 teams, the original amount of teams in the league. And one of the major reasons behind this is that it was reported that in the first 5 years of MLS, they had lost $250 million. MLS was looking, at least on the trajectory that it was going, like it might just be one of those American leagues that became part of American Soccer League history and never really took off. Now we're going to talk about their rise and their demise. The Fusion had fired their manager once again, and then they hired Ray Hudson, their community outreach director, and one of their commentators as head coach. He had been involved in the game in South Florida for many years now. He had played for the NASL and ASL version of the Fort Lauderdale Strikers. He, however, did lack managerial experience, but at the time MLS teams were much more willing to give chances to former players to start their managerial career. Many of you may have heard about him, as he is currently a commentator as well, very notable in the US, and is currently on the broadcasting team for Inter Miami. Talk about history repeating itself there. Maybe you'll become a manager for them if Diego Alonso's not so successful. Many who listen to him find him very passionate. I personally haven't really listened to him too much, but from the few clips that I've seen, he seems very passionate. And this passion would be displayed on the pitch during the course of his reign as the manager. I'll get onto that in just a bit. The Fusion had also traded for MLS star Preki, getting him from the Kansas City Wizards. He would continue to perform well with the Fusion as he had done with the Wizards despite being in his late 30s. Alex Pineda-Chacon scored 19 goals in the 2001 season, making him the MLS MVP, but then he petered out for the rest of his career, really becoming a one-hit wonder, unfortunately for him, in MLS. So Ray Hudson had the Miami Fusion playing some of the most exciting football in the league at the time. And in fact, many MLS pundits to this day who've watched the game since the league's inception or early on, still to this day say that that team was one of the most exciting teams in MLS that's ever played, or is the most exciting team in MLS that's ever played. And you have to note that this team was on a shoestring budget. Yeah, they had some pretty good players like Preki. They had, many good players on the team, many very exciting players, but it was Ray Hudson's excitement and passion and tactics that really put this team together. And come the end of the season, this wasn't just an exciting team. This was a team that got results. This was an attacking team that ended up finishing top of the league come the end of the season. They were first in the league. And they ended up actually increasing the average attendance come the end of the season to 11,000, just over 11,000 people per game, which was pretty good compared to the 1999 and 2000 season, where I believe the team went a bit below 10,000 fans per game. on average. So they would make it to the playoffs, obviously, since they finished first in the entire league, and they would play the Kansas City Wizards. And they would actually end up beating the Kansas City Wizards, and they would end up playing the San Jose Earthquakes. And you'd think that the San Jose Earthquakes game, yeah, it's a big game. They wanted to win this championship. They wanted, I believe they would make it to the MLS Cup final if they would beat the San Jose Earthquakes. And they were determined to win this game. But this game wasn't just a playoff game. It was a lot more than just a playoff game. Let's remember that the league was still considering to cut 2 teams at the end of the 2001 season. And they were looking to execute that plan. And 2 of the most considered teams originally to be cut from MLS were the 2 league-owned teams. These teams didn't have any owners. They were owned by the league. And these 2 league-owned teams were the Tampa Bay Mutiny, Miami Fusion's other Floridan counterpart, and the San Jose Earthquakes. Now, the reason why Miami Fusion, for this game it was important as well, was that Miami Fusion were beginning to be considered as well. Yeah, they were owned by Ken Horowitz. They weren't league owned, but they had problems of their own. They lacked corporate support, and they also had the lowest season's ticket sales in the league. And there were questions to be raised about their owner, Ken Horowitz, who many of the owners in MLS were considering, like, does he even have the finances to run this team? Because he was trying to run them the cheapest way possible. So come the end of the season, I think MLS thought that the Mutiny would be folded at the end of a very disappointing season for them. But the jury was still up between the San Jose Earthquakes and the Miami Fusion to decide who would be the one folded. And apparently, MLS had told the San Jose Earthquakes and the Miami Fusion that whoever would lose this 3-game playoff series would end up being folded. Like, I couldn't imagine that the success of a team financially would be determined by a 3-game series in the playoffs in 2001. I mean, this was not just going to go and dramatically affect those 2 teams. This would dramatically affect MLS for the course of its history. Who would stay on? What market would be continued to be invested in? And what market would end up failing, at least for a long part in MLS? I mean, I couldn't imagine the amount of pressure on the players for this game. I mean, whoever would lose their job. Also, 2 factions of MLS owners had formed. Ken Horowitz, of course, of the Miami Fusion, and the owner at the time of New York, New Jersey Metro Stars, both wanted to keep spending down, as opposed to Lamar Hunt, at the time the owner of the Columbus Crew, and the Kansas City Wizards, and Philip Anschutz, at the time the owner of the Colorado Rapids, wanted to keep spending higher to develop the game. So there was kind of a little bit of an internal battle in MLS over how they wanted to take the league. MLS was also beginning to think that Horowitz didn't have enough money to finance the team in the first place. Let's remember, he was running this team on a shoestring budget. Perhaps that's why he wanted to spend less money. Okay, now back to the San Jose Miami playoff series. What happened? MLS had a really weird format at the time, where the fixture would be a 3-game series, where 1 point would be awarded for a draw, 0 for a loss, and 3 for a win. Pretty typical stuff in that, but it's kind of weird for a playoff competition. Whoever would get the most points would move on. So I believe aggregate and the away goals rule didn't matter in this case. The first game in Miami was won by the Fusion 1-0. It was looking good for them. The next game was in San Jose, but the Fusion were thrashed by the Earthquakes 4-0. So it was all on the line in the final game at Lockhart, and it went right down to the wire. The game was tied 0-0 at halftime. Then the second half went through. Come the end of the game, it was still a scoreless tie. The game went to the golden goal, and in the 94th minute, Troy Dayek scored the golden goal for the San Jose Earthquakes. It was all over for the Miami Fusion. In January, it was announced that both Floridan teams, the Tampa Bay Mutiny and the Miami Fusion, would be folded. The The main reason cited was that there was no owner for the mutiny and the lowest corporate support in the league for the Fusion, as well as the least ticket sales. Inter Miami is doing the exact same thing that the Miami Fusion did, as they're playing in Fort Lauderdale on the exact same grounds that Lockhart Stadium used to sit on. However, they're planning to move to Miami in the future. A team by the name of Miami Fusion FC was also founded on April 2nd, 2015, to play in the unofficial fourth tier of US soccer, the NPSL. So I think I want to say as a final note, this team, it was kind of devastating how they ended up losing their team, because they had some bad seasons and they started declining in attendance, and then they started performing so well. They had the most exciting team possibly in the history of Major League Soccer under the guidance of Ray Hudson, and with all these players, even with the shoestring budget they had. And right when they were starting to perform well, right when the Miami Fusion were starting to perform well, started to bring fans back, they were folded over a 3-game series. I mean, I couldn't imagine how devastating that would be as a fan of that team. Anyway, thank you for watching this video. Please like and subscribe. Also check out my other videos in this series. I made 5 videos on Miami soccer history that I would urge you to check out. And I'm gonna make more videos on Miami soccer history about teams that came after the Miami Fusion as well. So make sure to subscribe to find out about that when I upload them. And until next time, see ya.